Australian broadcasting company has done a hit job on India. It has accused Indian intelligence officials of targeting Indian diaspora who support the Khalistani secessionist movement. The Australian government has said it does not tolerate violence or threats of violence and that the Australian interference laws were unequivocal. It's the exact same toolkit that is being used, that was created by the Canadian media organization, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, that is now being replicated by the ABC. The CBC report was the one that was cited by the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to make grossly false accusations on India that led to the expelling of a top Indian diplomat. India needs to be wary of such countries that not only harbour Khalistani terrorists but engage and support the secessionist movements in their backyard, which threaten the sovereignty and the autonomy of India. The harder question is, how must India tackle this menace that is only growing in different parts of the world, particularly in North America and certain countries in Europe? Let's start our conversation. Joining me on the telecast is Ambassador Bachusni Mukherjee. Ambassador, most concerning is that the same exact toolkit, a hit job if I may call it, that was used by CBC, that was used to cite by Justin Trudeau in the Parliament to attack India, to remove, to expel one of our top diplomats, is now being used by this other organization called the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. And the worst fact is that it is the government of Australia that is also responding to it.
Well, actually, Megha, I agree with you, but the Foreign Minister of Australia has refused to comment on it. So the Australians are playing down the story as far as their government is concerned. And I'm sure that we would respond by saying that stories of this kind, which are made by a broadcasting corporation without any proof, without any evidence being shown, is something that India rejects totally. That being said, you're quite right. This toolkit is obviously active everywhere, and the effort is to tarnish India's image internationally and to try to show it at par with China or Russia as far as spying on our allies, because after all, Australia and India are joined in Quad. We have an important defense, political and economic relationship. It doesn't do the Quad partnership any benefit at all by the Australian Broadcasting Corporation making these allegations, because after all, Quad is supposed to be patrolling the Indo-Pacific against whom? Against China. So if they're trying to bring down India to the level of China, they are downgrading their own partnership, strategic partnership with India. So this needs to be urgently sorted out internally by the Australians, because one has to also remember, Megha, that the earlier Australian Prime Minister was a great ally and friend of India, and the present Australian Prime Minister was not supposed to be so close to India, but he made many overtures after he became Prime Minister to ensure that the strategic partnership does not suffer, which is probably why the Australian Foreign Minister has refused to comment at all on this incident. I may also add that maybe it's time for us to also announce that we have in the past removed foreign spies from India quietly by informing the government concerned that they are indulging in espionage activities, which is not conducive to their diplomatic status, and they have been removed. So it's not as if such a thing is unknown to those countries who are finger pointing India. In fact, when an embassy is set up, Megha, both sides inform each other who are the intelligence agents in the embassy who are being given diplomatic status. This is normal. This is normal in an embassy. So people who are not diplomats may not be aware of it. But I am amazed that the Australian government, for example, did not stop the ABC from making such a report, because if we then say that there are 10 Australian operatives working in Delhi, they would be severely embarrassed. They have an enormous embassy. We could ask them, why do you have such a large embassy? You don't have so many natural stars. What are you doing here?
The other question arises, Ambassador Mukherjee, is when we break off ties with countries like Canada, and if there is something similar that is on the table with Australia, trade takes a hit. There are a large number of students who travel to Canada to study. There are a large number of students who travel to Australia to study. There are business trade that happens, a lot of entrepreneurs, there's tourism that happens in both these countries. With this kind of diabolical plot that is being played out in foreign countries, there was this Five Eyes investigation that had taken place. There were a number of these false accusations that had been put on our country with regards to the Khalistani movement. How do we stop it, especially when all these countries in North America and the Commonwealth nations that are coming together with the prime focus of attacking India?
I don't see Australian ties taking a hit, Megha, frankly. I think it's going to be downplayed by both sides. I don't think it's going to impact trade. I don't think it's going to impact strategic partnership.
Okay.
And I don't see it impacting the Quad either. This is an individual broadcasting corporation. It's already being played down domestically. It cannot be given the same dimension as the way in which the Canadian Prime Minister took it upon himself to try to embarrass the Indian Prime Minister, the Indian government, finger point at us, etc., when they have been sheltering those who brought down our airliner. So this is a completely different dimension. But I agree that if the Australians do the damage control that I suspect they will, there should not be a problem. But I don't see us breaking ties with Australia. For instance, we have not broken ties with Canada either. We have just downsized their mission when they downsized our mission. If the Australians want to downsize our mission, we will do the same. I don't think they're going to downsize
you know, what has happened, unfortunately, in the last 24 hours is that the Canadian Parliament has eulogized the Khalistani terrorist, Nijjar, and there was a moment of silence that was observed in the Parliament, which is once again supporting, harboring and coming straight out in public and showing that, listen, despite the designated terrorist tag that has been given by India to Hardeep Nijjar, that there have been a number of these communications that have been had between India and Canada, asking Canadian authorities to extradite Nijjar and give it to the Indian authorities for them to take action against this terrorist. Here are a bunch of parliamentarians who are coming, and the government of Canada is now supporting this man. And then does this mean that the government of Canada is supporting terrorism, is the question. All right. There's a question that I want to ask Jitarth Jai Bharadwaj. He's the founder and editor-chief of Australia Today. He's joining me on the telecast from Australia. Jitarth, how has been the reaction of the Australian government in this menace that is now being created by this ABC documentary?
See, I would like to say this: whatever ABC has produced is garbage, and they have kind of collected a number of different facts which has happened in last 6.5 years, and then they brought it together to produce this story which they claim is an investigative story. However, if you look very closely, they haven't done the work. Now, coming to the question which you have asked, how the Australian government is looking at it, then government officials are kind of unhappy with the way this story has played out and the way facts have been picked and put together to showcase as if India is doing some kind of a big espionage project in Australia. The chair of Australia and India Parliamentary Friends has come out and put a tweet about this, that the reporting in the manner of creating rift between Australia and India is not welcome, or ABC should have done better job while producing such a report, story or documentary, whatever you want to call it. So that's the part of the government. I have I've talked to a number of other MPs also, and from both sides of the aisle, and both Labour or Liberal, they are saying that it seems to be a hit job, as Ambassador Mukherjee has just explained.
So which are these politicians, which are these government officials or spokespersons who are coming out and saying that they are deeply concerned about these activities that are taking place against the Indian diaspora, against these Sikhs who take part in the Khalistani movement, who are supporters of the pro-Khalistani cause?
All right, let me explain that to you too. So as in India, there is a far left party, CPM, CPI, Marxist. They all support those ideas of next slides and all those systems which you can see in India. Same way in Australia, there is a party called Greens Party. The parliamentarian which you are seeing on TV is David Shoebridge. He is notoriously known to be anti-India, anti-Hindu. He was cautious by NSW Parliament when he was in NSW Parliament before coming to the federal Parliament, and he was asked to apologize to Indian Australian community and especially the Hindu community for his baseless allegation which he made in the Parliament. So if you see people like him saying what he has said, then, and he's a big supporter of Pakistan. So we have to understand it in geopolitics, where they come from, what are their voter base. So that's where they react to. And this Khalistan group have kind of supported this Green Party in terms of money and muscle both. So when the fundraisers are happening here in Australia in terms of Green Party I'm talking to, these Khalistan supporters, they put money in the election time, they provide muscles also. So that is one of the most important things to understand how and why you see these parliamentarians speaking in favor of what you are seeing.
That's interesting. That is an interesting point. Okay, Dr. Monica Verma, now what is the difference between the Canadian Prime Minister, the Canadian leadership making false, unwarranted charges against India versus Anthony Albanese, who is the Prime Minister of Australia, not paying heed to these false narratives that are being built against India?
I think it's a vast degree of difference. On one hand, Canada is showing the worst kind of politics to India. Even today in their parliament, they observed a moment of silence for someone who's got Interpol Red Corner notice against him. And on the other hand, if you look at Australia, and especially the Australian leadership, whether it's the Foreign Minister Penny Wong or it is their Prime Minister, they have time and again, assured India of action against the Khalistani elements. And this is how, ties between two countries progress. On one hand, the Western countries tell us that they are democracy and we are a backsliding democracy and things like that. But when it actually comes to showing their democratic credentials and taking into account the security concerns of a partner country, then they play games which Justin Trudeau is playing. So I think Justin has a lot to learn from the Australian leadership, where the free press or that freedom of speech card is being played by the journalists. ABC ultimately is a state broadcaster. But then the political leadership understands the value of India as a partner, especially looking at what's happening in the Indo-Pacific with the rise of China. So I think they are showing a great sense of maturity and a great example. They're setting for other countries.
Okay. I'm going to come back to Ambassador Mukherjee, and you were talking about the trade ties, the bonhomie that has been shared by Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the successive Prime Ministers. And of course, we can't forget during the COVID time when Scott Morrison was at the helm of affairs and the kind of affection that both Prime Ministers showed for each other. And I remember there was this picture, I think they had a video call, and and the Prime Minister of Australia, clicked a picture of samosas and chutney, and he said, I appreciate and I love Indian culture and Indian food. And there was a very warm reciprocation that was also shown by Prime Minister Narendra Modi for this gesture. This showcases, of course, the kind of difficult relations that India and Canada and their Prime Ministers have, versus the kind of bilateral ties that Australia and India have, keeping in mind that there is Quad that is in function, and Australia and India are strong partners in this bloc.
But absolutely, and I do agree with my colleague Mr. Bharadwaj in what he said, because we not only have a very dynamic relationship with Australia, but our efforts to reach out to the Indian diaspora in Australia has the fullest support of the Australian government. And whenever high-level political visitors go to Australia and meet the diaspora, they are often accompanied by Australian politicians. So it's a completely different relationship. Moreover, we have strong ties because of the Commonwealth. I myself have been to Australia when there was this Commonwealth Summit many years ago. And I noticed the great warmth that the Australian people had towards somebody, an Indian woman coming, a diplomat coming from India. The Australians also are part, Megha, of AUKUS, which is in a way, you could say the military arm of Quad, because Quad began as an economic partnership which expanded to a political partnership. But the military arm, so to speak, is AUKUS, and Australia is very much part of it, which means that Australia is part of the broader effort led by the United States, supported by India, to check China's rise, that Australia shares India's perception of danger in the South China Sea, of aggressive maneuvers, of attempts by the Chinese to take control of the Indo-Pacific, including by building bridges with, let's say, the Maldives, etc. For us in India, like in Australia, we look at each other as two huge countries with similar strategic perspectives, both huge democracies, and actually our efforts to curb fundamentalist activities by this tiny marginal group have been met with the fullest support, which is why, Megha, there are very few reports, for instance, of attacks on Hindu temples, attacks on Hindus in Australia, etc. The Indian diaspora in Australia is very much integrated into the Australian way of life. They don't stick out like a sore thumb like many other diasporas do. They are contributing to Australia's prosperity, and that is the way we want it. We've always told our diaspora that you should not stick out like a sore thumb. You should go with the flow, which is what they do. Which is why this report doesn't bother me at all.
Okay.
I am confident that the Indo-Australian relationship will be able to overcome.
Yeah, but Ambassador Mukherjee, when now that Jitat has given us an explanation, and if you actually read between the lines, this is an MP who's anti-India, anti-Hindu. He's an extremist, and he's a pro-Khalistani supporter himself. So when such strange statements come from members of parliament, like the man that we are talking about, but there are media organizations, agencies, publications and digital houses that pick on these statements, twist them because of the narrative that we want to create, whether it is domestically or international media, and create a hue and cry over it.
But Megha, Mr. Bharadwaj has already explained that this gentleman, he doesn't deserve to be called gentleman, belongs to a far-right fringe party. We should not even dignify his comment by discussing it on national television in a channel as important as yours, Megha. It's not going to have any impact at all, either in Australia or in India. In every democratic country, you always have such people who make these extremist and completely unacceptable remarks, and we have to learn to get on with it.
Yeah.
We should just ignore it, because it's been ignored by the Australian government in power and by the Australian people. So I think it cannot be compared in any way, as has been rightly pointed out, with what's happening in Canada, and in fact what happened in the Canadian Parliament, as Dr. Monica Verma pointed out. is really shocking, as you said, and definitely that needs some reciprocal gesture from us, not in Parliament, but in some way, which I'm sure we will do. And it goes actually against what this man, Justin Trudeau, said, I think yesterday, which is that he's trying to build a broader strategic and political partnership with India. Well, if he's trying to do that, then maybe he should rein in his own parliamentarians. Because he has
but Khalistanis are so deeply entrenched in the government which Justin Trudeau leads. He's just forced to support the Khalistani cause. His political career is on the line, and it is going to be dependent on the Khalistani forces and the coalition party which handholds him to, I don't know if he becomes the Prime Minister once again, but if he does, the larger part that is going to be played, the credit will have to be given to the Khalistani forces that have propped him as the Prime Minister now, and if that happens later on, unfortunately for India and of course for the country of Canada, is going to be a disappointing disappointing election. All right, Jitat, again, talking about how, Khalistanis and pro-Khalistani supporters and activists have taken over the Canadian government. In fact, you have a party that is in coalition with Justin Trudeau's party who have formed the government, and they are continuing to give support to Justin Trudeau when the elections take place in Canada, which is completely different from the political atmosphere in Australia.
That's true. See, in democracy, the demography rules, the numbers rule. In Canada, what we are seeing is, because there is a large number of community members who are being influenced or who have been taught, radicalized in a number of years since 80s to now. So it's been almost say 50 years process of radicalizing whosoever come in Canada, new international students, migrants. They help them somehow with fees and other things. They take them to their own gurdwaras, provide food, and then make them to work for them. That's how the system works in Canada. Now that whole system is being, they're trying to import it in Australia. Believe me, the Khalistan movement in Australia is also as old as it is in Canada. It has been, the whole Khalistan propaganda has been going. It used to be one yearly program in one of the remote places in Australia. However, it has in last 2.5 years, when they had a call of 2020 referendum because of the COVID, that 2020 referendum didn't happen, and that happened in 2022. So that's where whole process is now galvanized, and we are seeing it on the face. They are protesting in front of Indian consulates and everything. However, in Australia, the numbers of Khalistan supporters is much less, so that they cannot be part of one major party or influence them in terms
then what is the Canadian government doing to ensure that these Khalistani supporters and those who are moving the secessionist movement against India and hurting and threatening the sovereignty of the country are nipped in the bud?
No, they are not doing anything. Their laws and their purpose is different. We have to understand Canada allows everyone to demand for any state, wherever, be it in China, be it in Russia, be it in Middle East, be it in Africa, be it in anywhere. They kind of help and support. There are NGOs, government agencies, those who help these people to raise their voice against supposedly operations in their own countries. So they have created a system.
Is there a very visible crackdown by the Australian government to ensure that Australia doesn't become a Canada in the future?
See, I can't say in more details, but I can tell you one thing very clearly, that Australian authorities are now aware of the menace of Khalistan. what it can bring and how to take control of it. And they are keeping very close eye on the finances which have produced the menace here. And there have been a couple of incidents where agencies have not said that in as many words. Ambassador Mukherjee will bail me out on that. They plan and portrays it in front of media in some different avenue, but that was there have been two Khalistan crackdown here in Australia, and that is a good news for India.
Okay,
And,
okay, all right.
You don't
Fair
hear
enough.
any of the Australian authority supporting it.
Okay, all right.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.